Buckle up, let's ride the wave. Future's calling, tech to crave. High-tech podcast, light the way. Join the journey, click and play.
And we're here with episode 183.
Felt great.
Folks, as always, we found another AI tool, and Josh dove right in. He didn't wait, he didn't hesitate. He just got right on and collaborated. I don't know. I was trying to rhyme it.
Were you rhyming on purpose? Because you were rhyming for a while, and I was like, "That's incredibly impressive."
The beat, it was still the beat.
The beat was still in your head. Yeah, I through a coworker, I can thank him. Got me a deal on an AI tool to test out that gave me an access to a bunch of AI tools that I already had, but like some other ones. And I hadn't done music generation yet. And so I tried generating a high-tech podcast theme song twice. And guess what? The second option is what you just heard. So
and it's already stuck in my head because
honestly I'm more impressed with how it did. I was skeptical. I've heard some music generation, and I didn't realize it was that easy.
I'm not saying we're not gonna play it again this episode. Like I feel like it was so good.
It was.
I'm not,
Let's ride the wave.
Sorry. Exactly. Buckle up. Let's ride the wave.
Yeah. Listen. It's not a masterpiece. It sounds like it's auto-tuned, but you could say that about most pop music today. So I feel like
if we can hit the top 30 or 40 or 50 or 300, then anybody else can hit it too.
I love it. It captures our essence, really. I think is the important part.
The essence of the high-tech podcast, brought to you by Will and Josh, as always.
Now I will say,
we're having fun.
Real quick, just like we're introing, and I'm gonna talk about this before we even do the rest of our intro. So I'm breaking up our intro. But real quick, just a high-tech tip on doing that AI. I went in to this part Will and I didn't talk about. I went into our brand document that Chris helped us create for the High Tech Podcast, and I copied our entire brand description of the podcast to generate that song, in case anybody was curious. So my prompt said, generate a upbeat jingle for the High Tech Podcast using the description of the podcast below as inspiration. And so that's kind of how it got some. It's not perfect by any means, but it does kind of capture some stuff about the high-tech podcast that we like in the song,
I feel like it's fair to those who are listening today and getting this first time. Like these are the lyrics, right? You buckle up, let's ride the wave. Future's calling, tech to crave. High-tech podcast, light the way. Join the journey. Click and play and subscribe and like and follow us on all of our socials, at all of our stuff, at High-Tech Podcast, at High-Tech Pod. Email us, inbox at hightechpod.us if you'd like to be a part of the podcast. If you have ideas, if you want to know more about this tool that Josh just did today, if you are from that tool, if we tag you and you happen to hear this and you want to come talk to us about the tool, heck, whatever. But make sure you click, play, and subscribe to everything. Follow us over at hightechpod.us. That's our website with all of our episodes, all of our contact information, all the good stuff. So we've done it. That
was the smoothest transition you've ever done in the years of High Tech Podcast. It took 183 episodes, but we finally mastered a transition. That's it. That was we should probably just close the episode. I don't think anything more perfect is gonna happen than that.
Good night.
That was fantastic. That was great. I didn't even see it coming. You just flew into it like a transition ninja. It was crazy. Well,
there I was just, rhyming away, and I was like, well, I may as well just keep going, gotta stick the landing. All right, folks, it's not just about AI and AI videos this week. As always, do follow us, do all those fun things. We're toying around ideas for more songs and more shenanigans in the future, because we are just full of high-tech hijinks. That is our vibe, our goal, our attitude, our podcast voice, if you will. All that aside, we're going to jump into the topic, which is kind of fun, kind of techie. Forgive us. This is very e-learning focused. Oops. But the topic today is like why SCORM should die. Now, let me set the stage. What is SCORM? SCORM is an acronym,
An
which
alien from the planet. I'm just joking.
Yeah, or
I've
that.
always thought Storm sounds like an alien from another planet.
Yeah, no, I wish. SCORM is an acronym that stands for Shareable Content Object Reference Model. Yes, I Googled that. But what it really means to everyone in e-learning and in virtual learning and in digital learning and in any sort of learning that happens online is it's a file type, right? It is a way that they package e-learning so that almost any browser can play it. Now, if you've ever done a compliance course, an online training for work, the Pennsylvania Hunter Safeties course, if you've tried to adopt a child, you may have gone through various trainings for adoption.
Yes, I have.
Almost all of these things are made and then delivered through SCORM, a slightly cool file type. Right? It is a cool file type name. Sure. I didn't finish reading that. But SCORM's old. I mean, it's been around for quite some time. It's a standard in e-learning. It's a standard in kind of how browsers can interpret information. I not getting anything here. Let's see, maybe October of nope, that's the 3rd edition. Like, I don't even know how far this goes back. It goes back at least to 2005, definitely earlier than that. Looks like maybe 1999. SCORM has been around for a long time.
Yeah, for a long time.
What SCORM does is it takes you're rolling tonight. Watching on YouTube, which you should be, youtube.com/@hightechpodcast is our direct channel link. If anybody's watching on YouTube tonight, you're seeing all of Josh's shenanigans, which I do appreciate, my friend.
Yeah, I thought it was fun.
So SCORM takes all of the files and pictures and interactions and all the HTML junk in the background of e-learning and puts it into something a browser can interpret. So when you make an e-learning that has 30 slides and a couple of, multiple choice questions and a picture and a video, SCORM is the end product of all of that goes on the internet. So if you don't know what SCORM is, that's fine. You have used SCORM. If you're in kind of the virtual world, the virtual learning world, corporate uses them for compliance courses, all that kind of stuff. Well, why should SCORM die? SCORM should die because A, it's from 1999. It has versions.
Hold on. I want to focus in on something just real quick. Are you saying all things from 1999 should die? Because that was kind of just like because it's from 1999, as if like that year is like Will thinks all things should die.
All things from 1999 should die. It's just that's exactly the correlation. Josh is having too much fun with the banners, and that last one was kind of like an AI thing, like 1999 die. Yeah. It's like an AI would do if it's
your whole point is it's an old file type. It's been around a while.
They've updated it a bit, and it's gotten a little bit better. But here's the limitation, right? It formats things so we can see it on your browser. You can see it on as many browsers as possible, but even that is not consistently true. Some browsers can't do it, and then it can deliver information and it can capture some information, but it doesn't organize it well. It takes a lot of technical nuance to like use SCORM the best it possibly can. So before SCORM even ran its course, because the last update was in 2004, people were starting to look at something to take it to the next step. And this is actually kind of like a comparison episode of like talking through different file formats and a little bit of the why, because SCORM is not bad. It does do the work. Josh has built stuff in SCORM. I built stuff in SCORM. We've built stuff in SCORM for Harness Tech. Like it works. It's sufficient. But the real value in these formats, especially when we're talking about e-learning, is not only the experience we can deliver to the learner, but the tracking and the information we can get back, right? Like we understand educationally, if I deliver an assessment to my learners, I want to know how it went. I want to, see if they did well. I want to see if they have any feedback. I want to see how long they took to do the assessment. Like this is all very important information to learning. And SCORM doesn't give you that half. SCORM will give you a grade. Did they get an 80% or out of 100? But I can't track with SCORM if a learner spent 3 minutes on a page or 30 minutes on a page. Like it's just not it's not built for that level of detail in information tracking. Now, tin hat moment. I hate tracking. I hate being tracked. I don't like this stuff, but I do believe for educational purposes and when there's consent, if the learner knows it's happening and it's a part of the learning process, it's important. It is important to have not only did they get an 80%, but what did they select A, B, or C, or D, right? SCORM can give us some of those answers, but it doesn't get down into the nuance. And so xAPI is a file type and format that was finalized in April of 2013. xAPI is not even new. In fact, everything from 2013 might be able to go and die. Like, who knows if 2013 is also the 1999 of digital learning formats. Just out here to, be the...
I was just going to give like a disclaimer that the High Tech Podcast accepts all people from all years, really. and we... This phrasing is not supported nor financially backed by the High Tech Podcast. This is Will's own opinion.
This is not financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor.
Yes, we are just podcast hosts. That's I don't know where else to go with that. Anyway, xAPI.
xAPI, though, takes things to a new level. It can allow you to track how much time a user spent on a page, what they did on it, if they clicked anything. Like it can track all of the little stuff. And it tends to be more compatible across browsers. So we've got two big wins there, right? Like if SCORM is great at delivering learning, xAPI is great at reporting on that learning, because it's still delivering the same stuff. It doesn't have any limitations compared to SCORM. It is an upgrade from SCORM in the fact that it can do everything that SCORM did with delivering learning, but now it can also track. But here's the hard part. You have to set it up right. Like this is one thing I learned the hard way. I used some xAPI materials from a vendor or whatever, and I was so excited because in my learning management system, it showed me question 1 through 50 and every single answer that the student did and how much time they spent on those things. And then I was like, I can build xAPI. I've got this. I built a module in Storyline. I exported to xAPI, and I got all of that data in one long string of text, which is very hard to read and not very useful. Like it's that was a me problem. It's not an xAPI problem. But like, you imagine a 15-minute e-learning is going to have at least, 20, 30, 40 slides. It was a lot of data, and it was practically useless because I couldn't read the data. I could have, maybe today, if I had 1 minute AI, I could have dropped it in there and had it parse the data for me and turned it into something legible, but I did not have that in those days. So, this is kind of the battle, I think, when we think about the tech world of like the old works, SCORM works, we just export and use it. But are we really trying to innovate and not only challenge our learners with cool and innovative interactions, but then also track and report on that data for program effectiveness, return on investment, ROI, financial outputs, there's really important stuff we can get from the xAPI world that most folks are not investigating. And a little bit of this episode is me also just putting this out there, like, check it out, folks. Like, xAPI is worth investigating. It's worth looking into because you're going to get so much more data. Now, is your LMS compatible? Can your LMS track all that data? Like, there's a lot of questions that are important here, but I think just this is a big win when you're thinking about designing and delivering e-learning. I've also now talked for 20 minutes. So Josh, any thoughts or responses? Like, have you dealt with xAPI? What do you guys use for SCORM?
I second those things. I don't know. I mean, we mainly, in my environment right now, we mainly use SCORM because we're also, we're not solely doing our learning through like an e-learning authoring tool like Storyline or
you use your LMS
any
a lot,
of the other, right? Like we use our LMS a lot. It's instructor led. learning. So you've got the instructor as a part of it. It's not that dynamic of learning, but we're definitely doing that type of learning, right? So like we're doing trainings for faculty and teachers and students that we often tend to use more of the kind of e-learning authoring tools for. And we're even starting to look at what it looks like to build out more of those components into live courses in more small ways for students. But I think my take on this is I don't have a lot of experience with xAPI other than I know what it generally does. I know it's a good idea. But then I got a job that had nothing to do with it, and I didn't need to know what it really did anymore. So I think my take on this, if I'm understanding from you, is the biggest reason to start looking at this, right, is like, and for those who are listening to this who aren't in e-learning, this is going to be kind of a tough episode for you because like everybody who's in e-learning who's created any kind of e-learning course knows what the word SCORM is. Like they know what it does. It's like a Word document in regular world. Like that's basically kind of the dynamic. At least in knowing it doesn't do the same thing as Word. But it's as far as people know. So I think the biggest thing for me is just it's the tracking component of it, right? So like what Will's talking about is one of the advantages of e-learning, of digital learning, of online learning, and kind of those components is the amount of learning data you can capture, user data that you can capture for good reasons. Yeah. Unlike some others, look at you, Meta. But there's good reasons for it, right? So like what Will's talking about is you can use that to find out, okay, maybe on a regular quiz and a Canvas type LMS, I can find out how many students got a quiz wrong, right? Or got a question wrong, right? With xAPI, I can learn more about like how long did they spend on those questions, how often did they get it wrong, what options did they choose each time. Like you can start to get that data in exportable formats that other LMSs can't always do on their own, right? Like they can't just do that, but you can even track down to like if I'm doing a training on how to use a certain type of software or on how to get somewhere, right? Digitally, you can track where they clicked, how many times they clicked in different places, right? So like that data becomes super helpful for training and learning in different components, right? And so you start to get a lot more granular data, even down to like what paths learners went down and how many times they went down the different paths or branches that you built in your e-learning. And this really becomes handy when you're starting to do more custom learning paths. And then on the other end of it, this data then becomes very useful to get into more AI tools of today to then aggregate and find common themes and find out more information about how your learners are doing, to Will's point, then for program success and evaluation down the road. And like, so that's where I think there's a lot of value behind it. But Will's right. People are using xAPI, but it's not as ubiquitous as SCORM. I mean, as people are still exporting SCORM as their files. And so I think the core of this is pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone of the SCORM so that we can leverage some of the strengths and directions that things are going now in the learning space where you can start to capture more information. So like I can use that xAPI to create a language quiz or tool in an e-authoring tool like Storyline, and not just learn what they answered, but learn which paths they went down, where they clicked, what they did, what their even text responses and things like that on average, and using all that data then to throw into something to find out common themes between learners and what they did. So you can kind of help them, you can help make the learning experience better. You can help the individual learners. And so that's where this all comes down to, is that one of the advantages of online learning is that there is a lot of data that you can leverage to then enhance the experience for the learner. And so this xAPI is one of those solutions that helps us get there, and helps us get there in a medium. So for those listening who are more in the space I am, where you're using more like Canvas as an LMS or Schoology, well, at least some of you still are, and then using some other ones, and where you're having students submit assignments and things like that. That's great, but so you could create actual assessments or even experiences for students that would give you some granular data. So like for example, right? So like I might build I might not build like a full out quiz for something, but I might, instead of just like presenting a bunch of information in a video, I might create kind of like an interactive learning experience for students where they're learning, like let's just say they're learning how to deal with counseling is an easy one for me to do for some reason with this one because there's a lot of simulation.
I think we've done these several times.
Yeah, we've done these.
That's one of my
times.
first examples.
Yeah, like I feel like I need another example, but like you can have students like learn how to interact with different people and then have them go through simulations of doing that, and you can get a ton of granular data about what they selected, where they went, why they went there. Like if you build it the right way, you can get a lot of information that can teach you about the student, even can be used to then build more responsive learning later on in the course, right? Like that stuff can build on top of each other,
right?
Through xAPI.
And one of the opportunities, of course, here, like I wanted to bring up this very technical conversation because it's something I deal with a lot in like corporate e-learning. But the point behind the difference is the value we get in tracking learning. Like ironically, today, Josh and I have both a conversation and an app/topic that are like interchangeable. Our app really for this conversation is Storyline, because Storyline can be built in such a way to track learning effectively. And that's the point of this, right? If we're using Storyline as a tool to build scenario-based branching experience where a manager comes in and they see like, I built this once, so it's the example that comes to mind, but like they see 5 different employees and they click on each employee and each one's kind of got a different problem, and they choose like, all right, let me address this employee's problem. And so they go down that line, the employee gives a little more context, and then they give an ABC kind of response. And it's not correct, incorrect, it's best-ish, pretty good, okay, but not in that order. And so based on how you respond, then it branches out into different decisions, right? So now the employee's like, well, I don't know, I didn't really like that answer. And the employee starts to get hostile with the manager. So you picked the least good answer. Now that they're hostile, you get 3 new questions. What do? Do you try and placate them? Do you tell them what they want to hear? Do you give them some like stern, but empathetic listening and response? And like based on those things, then you get more answers. Well, in SCORM, we're going to get at the end result, did they successfully get through all of those branching options? That's what SCORM's going to tell us. With xAPI, it's going to tell us like, did they spend 3 minutes on each question? Did they click on maybe one but then change it before they hit submit, right? Like maybe they clicked on one and then they thought about it a little bit and they clicked on a different one and then hit submit. Like all those types of interactions as the manager would go through that branching scenario of what to do with an employee is data they can respond to. And so then we get to learn, of course, as Josh was saying, okay, there's the technical things and ways we can improve the e-learning package, but other managers can get that same data. It's like, hey, 9 out of 9, let's say 90% of managers tended to pick instigating or even aggressive responses as opposed to responses that would have kept the employee happier or more chill. Now we have a problem. Now we can actually, as a business, respond to something and be like, wait a second, our managers are aggro. Our managers are starting problems and causing relational issues if this is how they're responding to the scenarios. Right now, we don't know that. We don't have any of that data. We just know they completed the branching scenario. Imagine the richness of information you could have if you use Storyline and tools like this to build learning where they're kind of giving these kinds of scenario like that. This is its own scenario, right? We can evaluate the effectiveness of our managers by them going through this kind of learning. And we need tools, formats, if you will, like xAPI to get to that kind of data. It's exciting to me. This is really nerdy. It's very technical, but it's pretty exciting what it could do for learning if we had this access, if we had this information.
Yeah, it would be, I think, a lot more helpful, and it would be, the learning experience wouldn't just be like, did you pass, but would it actually be about like what the learner's been doing and developing that, right? And looking at that bigger picture. And like I would be very like I'm currently going through a situation where evaluating a handful of courses and building a report off of it to see how they've been doing, right? And some of this data, more granular data about where students are going and when and what they're doing, would be a lot more helpful in the online environment, to figure out where holdups are, how they're branching through scenarios, how you might need to adjust, right? And that type of data then could be helpful even in the middle of a course, like a longer course. Like an instructor could use that data to adjust later on
as they're going.
In those scenarios, they're much more formative in that way, and that's where we can get to some of that formative assessment digitally that we might be better at in person because we can be there and adjust as we're doing it, but we can actually do digital formative assessment in a more granular way using tools like this, like xAPI, and that's why I think it's helpful. And unfortunately, like we're just as guilty as everybody else. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not doing it. I mean, there is definitely more xAPI being used now than there was, but like you're right. It's one of those things that's much easier just to export out as the old file type. And
I see it on job descriptions, but it's like I don't even know that the person asking for it in the job description knows what they're asking.
Oh no, they 100% don't. I think 9 out of 10 times I've seen that, and I'm talked to the person, and they have no idea what xAPI is. They just think they know that somebody in learning development should care about it.
Right. It's a buzzword.
You know, yeah. It was like when oh my gosh, HTML5 first came
out.
You know what I mean? Like everybody was like, you
need to be able to code in HTML5.
You should know how to do HTML5. Do you even know what HTML5 is? Like, do you just is that a thing?
Do you know that it is different from HTML4, but it's also not different from HTML4?
You know, it's really not that big of a deal. It's like you know,
it's good, but
like it's not that hard to anyway. So you also have down here AICC, which I've seen this before, but I've not actually had very much experience with it. So how is this different than xAPI? Because xAPI I do know. AICC I've seen it in an export dropdown, I think. And I haven't done
an option, and I went right past it.
And I went past it. You know, that was my vibe.
What I understand, so my practical experience here is first and foremost, right? I've always used SCORM. I've tried out xBigPI and I understand what it's supposed to do, but I didn't do it right. And then I also have some vendors that use AICC format. I think there's actually more of a bridge between AICC than xAPI than I thought. So there is supposed to be with AICC, there is a functional purpose to this where it's the same kind of formatting stuff. It delivers e-learning, but it's connected to a source point. And as far as I understand, xAPI also requires this. I just don't know if they both have the same functionality here. There's something called an LRS, a learning record store. Now, no, it's not. It's not. You know, it's record store, right? You go buy, 45.
Well, I did actually know what you were talking about, but yeah, it's also a record store.
But the LRS is supposed to be between your delivery tool, like your LMS, and the learning tool. So in AICC, what happens is the value in is I can purchase from a vendor learning materials, and in my context, it's compliance material, it's anti-harassment content, and so when they make updates to that content, as long as I'm a subscriber, they can push that update straight to my learning module in my learning management system using AICC. So AICC doesn't necessarily have, or it may have, I'm not honestly not too familiar, as much recording ability as xAPI, but it has this ability to be directly linked to a source point. So my vendor uses an LRS, all of their AICC files are connected there, and then they push out information to those customers who are purchasing it. If there's a translation change in the context of anti-harassment discrimination, like, okay, it's 2025, who knows what the heck is happening in that world in the United States of America, but previous to 2025, there are 13 states in the United States that require a very specific anti-harassment discrimination training if you meet certain standards. Well, if one of those states changes something, it's very difficult to track that down and update that and find that in my learning stuff. So to have the vendor do that for me and then push that update straight to my module I don't have to do anything. And AICC is the link from my LMS to their LRS. And it's beautiful. You don't have to do anything, manual. Before, if that change happened, I would have to go to my vendor, ask for a new version of the SCORM material, download that SCORM, upload that into my LMS, and then either my LMS would have a versioning control tool and I'd be able to add a new version and it wouldn't disrupt too many people, or I would have to delete the, delete the old version of the SCORM and put in a new version of SCORM, which would completely disrupt reporting purposes, because anytime you delete a training material, of course, all the reporting materials go away with that training material. Like, thinking of most LMSs, if you get rid of the original material, the reporting content goes with it. So I can't just necessarily update unless you have an LMS that has version control. I happen to have one where I can add in a new version and it keeps all of that data, consolidated. But really cool functionality here. I haven't tried to build AICC or deliver it. I've used it as an end user, and it's awesome. It's fantastic to know that it can do that. Should we maybe dig in a little more and figure some of these things out and have a little more robust conversation in the future? Sure. But I wanted to put these things on folks' radar, because if you're building e-learning, or if you're purchasing e-learning, if you're in those markets, it's really important to understand at least these basic differences so you can protect yourself. I have a vendor who uses AICC, and it's a beautiful, wonderful place, and I don't have to do as much work to keep up the materials, but it also keeps my reporting, it keeps my training materials, it keeps everything more accurate, more consistent. I also have a vendor that only gives me SCORM files, and even last week I was dealing with an issue where a learner ended up in a course with an old SCORM file that had deactivated and gave them a license count limit breached error, and they submitted a ticket, and they were upset because they should be able to take the training. Oops, had to get a new SCORM package from my vendor, upload the new SCORM package, fix the problem. But we don't have to live in that world. This is an era of AI and automation. We want to rely on tools like AICC and xAPI to bridge this gap.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't have much more to say on them other than I think there's value to it. I think you're right. We have to have a bit more of a detail. This was kind of an initial conversation we just kind of picked as a topic in between all the other topics. So it's clear we need to, I think, dig into it a little bit more. I think my question for you then, right, is we've talked about storyline a lot on the podcast before. And like, for those who are instructional designers or technologists, usually not as much in like formal education, or more kind of in corporate or like different alternative e-learning spots. Most of them know what storyline is, right? So we've already done that. We've talked about it. Go to the website, hightechpod.us, if you want to find out more. There's other episodes on storyline. I think what you wanted to focus on here is, so how do you build storyline? Because it's not just using these protocols. You actually have to build the courses in these e-learning authoring tools like Storyline. So Storyline being the tool we're talking about here in this episode. How do you build a storyline package to function best with like xAPI specifically?
Yeah. Well, the good thing is there's a couple of built-in features, right? We can always use their quiz question types and the standard things. What that means is you have true, false, multiple choice, multiple select, short answer, some matching, basic quizzing tools. Why that's not enough, though, and why we want to do this larger conversation on this issue is that branching scenario. As an example, right? In Articulate Storyline, if you make a quiz, it's pretty much one question at a time.
Yeah.
You can't make a quiz page with multiple quiz questions, as an example. If you want to do that, you have to use custom features. You can't just use, you can't just say, I want 2 quiz questions on one page. It just doesn't do that. It does 1 quiz question per page. So if you want to get tricky, you got to start working with variables. And I'm going to open this up by saying big credit and big thanks to my friend and colleague, Sean Pyle. We're going to put some links to his work on this episode, because that's how I learned about this stuff. And I needed the basic tools he gave me in these articles to then figure these things out and start to use them in crazy, wonderful ways. But when you look at variables in any context, right? We've all first engaged with them in mathematics in school. You know, a variable stands for anything else in its place. In math, it's like X can be 1, 2, or 3, right? X could be any number. We don't know. X is something. In e-learning, and specifically articulated storyline, variables are going to do one of two things. They're going to generate and create a random number or represent a random item. You know, we very typically just go straight to numbers, but it could represent anything, a word, a letter, a number, a shape, a sound, something, right? Or it's going to allow the user, the end user, to input a sound, a shape, a number, a letter, a word, like whatever. Variables are containers. Yeah. Variables hold the space for something. So two easy examples of a variable in articulate storyline. When you want to maybe personalize the learning a little bit and you want it to call the learner by name. So my name is Will. I open an e-learning and it says, hello, what's your name? And it has a little box to type in your name. You type in William, you hit enter, and on the next page it says, welcome, William. We're excited to have you in this learning. We're going to go on a journey to blah, blah, blah. And then throughout the entire learning experience, it'll continue to say your name. That's a variable. The variable in the back end is learner's name. And when you type it in and hit enter, there's a trigger that's capturing your name and holding it in the memory of the e-learning file, in the SCORM package, frankly. That's one easy way to use a variable. And that's like top example of how we try to use them to personalize learning and whatever. The other side of variables, though, is you can do the reverse, right? You can put stuff into these things. And so anywhere that someone goes, it modifies and shows exactly what you were trying to show them. It could randomly select a number as an example. You can say the variable is any number between 1 and 10. You can say the variable is any random number. You could put in, letters, words, things, and stuff like that. And so we use these variables to both gather information from the learner or maybe randomly generate information that they see. Tying this into tracking, though, that's where we can start to think through awesome and just crazy imaginable things, right? Like building a Scrabble game. You could build Scrabble in Articulate Storyline. It would be ridiculous. There'd be many variables.
That sounds horrible. That sounds like the worst thing to try to build. Like I don't like that at all. That's so many.
There would be hundreds of variables.
I don't want to do that at all. No, like I think the best way to think about this, right, is the variable component is like Will said, it's container for stuff you put in there you want to record. So like a practical example of this is I was just talking to Will about this. A person on my team, she wanted to she had an SME who wanted to do basically kind of like this competency assessment in the course, but like the competency assessment was something he uniquely developed for the course, right? It's not something that's out there. It's not something you just get from a resource. So props to him for developing.
Myers-Briggs. It's not SBTI.
It's something unique for this course, right? So like you wanted to build that own thing. So right, the parameters were students would fill out very much like, in Likert scale type of vibe, fill out these numbers, and depending on their scores, they would get different kind of ratings in different categories. And depending on those ratings, if I still haven't fully reviewed it because it was out for 3 weeks, but as I understand it, then there are different responses that the end learner will get, right? So where variables come into this is she built variables in the back end to basically receive the numbers that the user puts in for the different categories. So there's a variable for each kind of category of question that fits in here, right? And the user can't tell where the category questions are because they're all mixed up. So blessings to her. She had to find all these mixed up categories and like create variables for each of them. And these containers then, depending on the learner, might answer, I'm a 3 here or 2 or whatever, whatever the numbers are. That variable captures that number because she has something set up on the back end and storyline to look at that and go, if they select a 2, add a 2 to that variable, right? And then depending on their score, they get different responses, right? And then she's even got other variable containers for the different text that gets sent out, right? So like
Right.
this is where things get a lot more custom than a Canvas or a Blackboard or those LMSs where you have your default quizzes where you're filling out information, right? And so for the technical people who like developing courses or are into instructional design and things, if you haven't started working with Storyline or doing something, I highly recommend going and checking it out. There's a lot more custom ability there. That was totally a word. There's a lot
Custom
more
ability.
All right. You say I'm like Barney from How I Met Your Mother, just making up words. Like
And just accept it. It is true.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. No, you can customize that a lot more, right? So you can build in a lot of. So what she was able to do then is create this extensively customized result page that gives students very custom responses based on what there are. And then when you start to plug AI into stuff, which that's a whole different conversation for a different day, people are starting to plug AI into with those variables. Then you start to get even a more custom experience, right? That you just can't do in a regular kind of default LMS.
And functionally a little bit on what you're saying there, like we're not going to reveal it, we don't know what it is, but let's just say, right, you know, as Josh was saying, it's capturing those variables. So let's say the end result is you're a yellow, red, green, or blue, whatever that means, right? Like you're trying to find out if you're a red person, yellow person, green person, a blue person. As all those variables add up, you know, or we could go with a Panzer tank, an M1 Abrams,
something
and
like that.
Whatever you want to be.
The exam is actually just to find out what color you like. It's a color class. Exactly. It's the whole thing.
But like as those numbers add up, yellow is between 1 and 20, red is between 21 and 40, you know, blah blah blah. And so the numbers have to add up, and that's where, you know, the designer your person, your friend, I don't know if you said it or not. Allie's in the background doing the math to figure out, like, if it's this, then it subtracts this. And if it's this, it adds that to get those things to balance out to, again, 1 through 20. But then there's still a variable in the background saying if at the very end, the learner, it says if the learner gets 1 through 20, tell them they're yellow. If they get 21 through 40, tell them they're red, right? Like that's what this is trying to do. And of course, it's something more meaningful than colors, but
or like a practical example from something we did. We created a password module.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Credit to Will. He used AI to figure out some Java. There's some JavaScript involved with the variable, but there was a variable involved. Where they learned how to create a secure password, right? And so Will and I were really adamant. We didn't just want to like create a quiz that quizzed them on the information they found out about what a secure password was, because the goal of the course was that they would be able to come up with a secure password.
Right.
So the end result or assessment was, is there a way for us to build a text box where they put passwords in and it tells them if it's secure or not, right? And it gives them suggestions based on what they did, right? And so Will found some JavaScript. So this wasn't all variables, but went and found some JavaScript, which was very easy. He just used AI to come up with it, plugged it into they have a JavaScript system in Storyline. You don't really even need to be a pro with JavaScript, like we're not. You just kind of plugged it in and used a variable, right? Will, it was a text variable that they could input in, right? So again, a box or a bucket that could capture something. The variable was a text variable, which meant he put it up on the screen and they could type whatever they wanted in it. And then with that JavaScript addition, it was able to look at that text variable and say, did they put this, and this in there? If they didn't, like if they missed a special character or a capitalized word or a number, it could then provide feedback under the box to say, well, you missed this, try adding, blah, blah, blah into the password. And so then the user could go back and forth and keep doing that. Now, where xAPI comes into play with Storyline now is you build that into Storyline, and then with xAPI, you can monitor every individual input that they put in an attempt. So you can see how often are your learners getting the password validator at the end correct. But not only that, how often are they missing numbers? How often are they missing that? Like what's tripping them up the most? And if I see they're not getting that they need to add special characters into a password, I can always go back then to that e-learning and go, how can we sure that up in the course? How can we make sure
what
that
do we need to
teach
them to do it?
Teaching them and getting them to practice that, right? And so that's a practical example where all these things come together, and where like a Storyline, we're not revolutionizing the world by telling you about it, but where a Storyline can be a very powerful tool that honestly I don't think people realize the level of what they can do in there.
Yeah.
They end up so many training courses are glorified PowerPoints. It's like a video that I watch for, speaking of adoption training, I'll call them out. Pennsylvania, your adoption training courses are horrible. It's just video for so long. And then I get a quiz that's like 30 questions long. And I wasn't told ahead of time that I needed to get a certain score. And if I didn't, I had to restart the entire content again. That's just not good learning. I'm not going to learn that way. That's dumb. It's bad, and it's so many features of Storyline are not being used. The basic features used by Storyline by most people are content, quiz. Did they get that score? No. Go back to content. That's not learning. And unfortunately, so much is being wasted in Storyline when we're not using those features. I didn't know I had a soapbox about that, but now I do. There you go.
Thank you. I'm glad. Right? Because Josh and I make this stuff. We're hands-on in this, in our careers and things like that. Most people just perceive it from the other end, but like I have fun, when someone's in the room with me and they're like, I had to take this blah 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 compliance course this week and and I kind of peek my ear up. I'm like, what was it like? Did it have a brand? Was it copyrighted? Did it have I start to learn about what it is. I'm like, oh yeah, it's that kind. You're fine. Just click through it. Nobody's watching. Or if they tell me certain things, I'm like, oh, you might want to be careful. They're watching how much time you spend on it, right? Like I can perceive what people are doing and designing in their e-learnings, just how people describe the learning. Because if it's like Josh just said, if it's just slides with like a couple of questions at the end, no one cares. No one cares. No. They just want to see that you got a complete on the end. Like I'll tell you, up the line, they can't, and they're not tracking anything more than did you complete the module.
Yeah, and I've been in the engines that care. They only care about that. Where like so much of like employee training or like professional development at different organizations is just like, did they check the box that they learned, quote unquote, learned the thing. And there's just so much more power to digital learning and e-learning and online learning that I think is being missed in a lot of these kind of interactive scenario-based stuff where people like Sean or other people we follow on LinkedIn we've talked about before who are using AI variables, xAPI to create robust custom experiences with different learning paths and different dynamics to the learning is super important. So yeah, I feel like, just don't be those guys. Be different. Do use those tools, the other tools.
Be better. I'm starting to lag a ton, so why don't you take us out?
Yeah. Okay. So, what's next on the High Tech Podcast? Episode 184 will be next week, and I'm excited about this one, folks. I'm gonna preface it this way, okay? Will and I have not prepared for this episode at all, okay? And we're not going to, because I think it's going to be funnier if we don't, okay? Next week, Will and I are going to try to use AI to live on the podcast create a tanks game. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. We're gonna try a couple different tools. I know we're gonna try ChatGPT. We might try Claude as well. We might try some of the new tools I have access to because I now have some new coding AI tools I have access to. But basically, we're gonna try to create an HTML tank game just using AI, right? And live and show how that's possible. Why this is gonna be fun? Because I don't know if it's necessarily gonna work. Okay. And this is a good example of, can AI really do this for people who don't know what they're doing? Because Will and I don't know how to build these games. So we're going to be using that. Yep. We're going to be throwing it into a tool called CodePen, which we'll tell you more about as well during the episode. And we're going to have a lot of fun with that. So that's going to be next week. We're going to use AI to create a tanks game live on the podcast. It's going to be great. So just a reminder, you can find us on Twitter, YouTube, and all the other social media things that are out there at High Tech Podcast or at High Tech Pod. Please go like, subscribe, hit the bell. Let us know that you care. Whatever you want to do, that'd be great. It'd be great. We want to know that you're listening. If you'd like to be on the podcast, you'd like to talk to us, you'd like to let us know how great the new intro song is, or you'd like to send us an AI song you created, I don't care. Hit us up at inbox@hightechpod.us. It's one of the best ways to get a hold of us at the podcast, specifically get a hold of Will, because I don't remember the last time I've opened that inbox, but Will does all the time. So somebody will get back to you. Also, a reminder, we have a website, hightechpod.us. Every episode has an episode page. Check out this one specifically because we'll link to some of Sean's stuff that Will was talking about earlier, as well as some other resources you can check out. And I will probably try to link to the software I use to create the AI song for the podcast. So check that out. Okay, folks, this is a wrap on another week. Empowering minds.
Embracing tech.
Cheers.
Buckle up, let's ride the wave. Future's calling, tech to crave. High-tech podcast light the way. Join the journey, click and play.